Hi. Let's see how to do this. I'm Jeff. If I haven't already said this yet, this is my Read on C.S. Lewis project where I'm learning about him through everything that he wrote, going through it in the order that he wrote it. The work today that we're going to go through, or at least try to start on, we'll see how far we get, is a sermon that C.S. Lewis delivered back in 1941, and we'll learn more about that in just a moment as we pull it up here. But I am joined today by a very special guest co host, Sandy. Sandy, thank you for joining today. And
Happy to.
we talked about this a little bit, and you offered up Weight of Glory as an item for us to read through together. So tell us a little bit about that choice and why you decided you wanted to do that one.
Um, well, I actually have owned the book. Well, I thought I did. Anyway, I haven't found it, but I've got it online. Um, I've owned a number of C.S. Lewis's books, several decades at least, and and have gotten out of reading a lot of things like that. Um, he was a favorite of one of my best friends in my teens, and I've gone through all the usual culprits, Narnia, Screwtape Letters, the Space Trilogy. And I have read some of his essays, but I had not approached this one. And I've been in a point of life where um, I'm looking at my faith journey, I'm reassessing some things. And so I poked through the options and really liked what I saw in this one. It will challenge me in a few places.
Okay, great. All right, well, I have it up here on the screen so I can pull it up. If you're ready to get started, we'll jump into it.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, let me switch my view here. A little bit of production on the fly. And hopefully you can see it on my screen.
I can see it easily.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'll leave it to you if you want to just start with that first part and then the little section there where it explains when this was delivered and where it was delivered.
So this is number one in the book of the same name, The Weight of Glory. Um, it says that it was preached originally as a sermon in the Church of St. Mary the Virgin, Oxford, on June 8, 1941. Published in Theology, November 1941, and by the SPCK in 1942. I'm not sure what the SPCK is, but it
Me
must have
neither.
been popular.
I guess we could ask Robot Lady if you want. That's one of
Sure.
our first questions. All right. Let me see if I can dial her up here. Hey, Robot Lady. Sandy and Sandy's joining us today, and we are reading from Lewis's sermon, The Weight of Glory. And here at the very beginning of The Weight of Glory, it gives us a little, I'll call it a footnote. I guess it's more of a head note. I don't know if that's what you call this, but it says it was originally preached at the Church of St. Mary the Virgin in Oxford on June 8th, 1941. And then it was published by some kind of organization or institution called the SPCK in 1942. Do you have any idea what the SPCK is? She's thinking.
Yes, the SPK stands for the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge. It's a Christian charity and publishing house based in the UK, known for publishing books on theology, religious history, and Christian doctrine. They played a significant role in promoting Christian literature and education, and they published The Weight of Glory after it was first preached.
Awesome. Thank you, Robot Lady. All right, we'll turn
Nice.
her off because she can talk for days.
Okay. So um, I'll read, and if you want to stop me, if you see something. Otherwise, if I see something interesting, I'll just stop.
Perfect. Love it.
Okay. If you asked 20 good men today what they thought the highest of the virtues, 19 of them would reply unselfishness. But if you asked almost any of the great Christians of old, he would have replied love. You see what has happened? A negative term has been substituted for a positive, and this is of more than philological
Phil-
importance.
philological, I think, is the word.
Philo, Thank you. Philological importance. The negative ideal of unselfishness carries with it the suggestion not primarily of securing good things for others, but of going without them ourselves, as if our abstinence and not their happiness was the important point. I do not think this is the Christian virtue. I do not think this is the Christian virtue of love. The New Testament has lots to say about self-denial, but not about self-denial as an end in itself. We are told to deny ourselves and to take up our crosses in order that we may follow Christ. And nearly every description of what we shall ultimately find, if we do so, contains an appeal to desire. And we're going to need to go up a wee bit.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I wanted to pause there for just a second because something's just really jumping out at me. It's what he's already saying. Just that idea that self-denial is something that we are asked to do, or that Christians are asked to do, that we're asked to do as Christians. I identify as a Christian, so I guess I'll say that. But yeah, this concept of it's a means to an end. It's not the end, and the end is really is following Christ at that point. So it's like deny yourself so that you can kind of clear the way is what I'm reading into this, to make you better able to follow Christ.
Well, and that's an important point. I had a few. I didn't mention when I came in. I ended up going through a divorce in 2016, and in the couple of years just prior to that, I had questioned a few. There was a couple of pastors at the little church I attended, so I'd asked each of them about this whole concept of taking up your cross. Often goes alongside the phrase people would say, "Die." You have to learn to die to self, but they would also say to die to Christ, and that was something I struggled with. Excuse me, a bit of a throat thing, and yeah. I remember one day in a particularly poignant conversation saying, "But how literally do you mean that? Like if you're telling me I have to die to Christ, how literally do you mean that?" And so where Lewis points out that this is not an end in itself, it has a practical purpose, but it isn't an end in itself. That was one of the things that jumped out at me too when I first read the essay, and having been through a place where I was questioning how do you apply things like this. That was one of my the portions of the essay that had me choosing it.
Yeah, it makes it a little bit easier to kind of understand the concept, really anything that's being presented, where you can say, well, what's the practical application? And I feel like more than any other author that I've come across when it comes to Christianity, Lewis is really good at doing that, of saying, here's the concept, and also let me give you like an example of a practical application. And sometimes he like demonstrates it with an instance or like a little story that he tells. But other times like this, he doesn't even have to tell a story. He just kind of lays it out, very simply. At least that's how I feel he's done here.
Yeah, well, and as it said that it's initially presented in a sermon, then his logical assumption would be that his audience would understand the concept already, and he's just reminding them of it, I would think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Let's jump back in.
That was a great interruption.
Okay, good. I'll try to keep my interruptions great.
Okay.
All right, let me scroll a little bit, and then your place is right here. Oh, I can't highlight it, so hopefully you can find your spot.
Okay. Mm-hmm. If there lurks in most modern minds the notion that to desire our own good and earnestly to hope for the enjoyment of it is a bad thing, I submit that this notion has crept in from Kant and the Stoics and is no part of the Christian faith. Indeed, if we consider the unblushing promises of reward and the staggering nature of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures. fooling about with drink and sex and ambition, when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased.
Yeah, that's a really well-worn Lewis quote that you'll see all over the internet.
Yes, I don't mind having good things repeated.
Mm.
We must not be troubled by unbelievers when they say that this promise of reward makes the Christian life a mercenary affair. There are different kinds of reward. There is the reward which has no natural connection with the things you do to earn it, and it is quite foreign to the desires that ought to accompany those things. Money is not the natural reward of love. That is why we call a man mercenary if he marries a woman for the sake of her money. But marriage is the proper reward for a real lover, and he is not mercenary for desiring it. A general who fights well in order to get a peerage is mercenary. A general who fights for victory is not. Victory being the proper reward of battle, as marriage is the proper reward of love. The proper rewards are not simply tacked on to the activity for which they are given, but are the activity itself in consummation. There's also a third case, which is more complicated. An enjoyment of Greek poetry is certainly a proper and not a mercenary reward for learning Greek. But only those who have reached the stage of enjoying Greek poetry can tell from their own experience that this is so. The schoolboy beginning Greek grammar cannot look forward to his adult enjoyment of Sophocles as the lover looks forward to marriage or a general to victory. He has to begin by working for marks, or to escape punishment, or to please his parents, or at best in the hope of a future good, which he cannot at present imagine or desire. His position therefore bears a certain resemblance to that of the mercenary. The reward he is going to get will in actual fact be a natural or proper reward, but he will not know that until he has got to it. Of course, he gets it gradually. Enjoyment creeps in upon the mere drudgery, and nobody could point to a day or an hour when the one ceased and the other began. But it is just insofar as he approaches the reward that he becomes able to desire it for its own sake. Indeed, the power of so desiring it is itself a preliminary reward. This reminds me of something that Jacob would say time to time when talking about learning the Torah. And the way you get children to learn the Torah, they give them a little honey or sweets for everything that they read through and memorize. And that's how you get started, because for a child of 5 or 6, where they're starting this journey, it's dry. It's not, you don't love it for the words on the page. You don't love it for the things you're memorizing or the concepts. You simply love it because you're going to get a sweet if you do it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's the rewards are proportionate to your capacity to appreciate them. I really like this analogy that he gives with like learning Greek. I can't remember if in this sermon he goes into more detail about the way that I think about this, or if it's just something that kind of crept up in my mind as when I first read it and understood what he was saying. But just the idea of, it doesn't have to be Greek, it can really be any language, but just, as a child, you're learning the alphabet, and maybe you can find some fun in, I can remember what that shape means, and the capital Q looks funny and the little q looks really weird, or something like that, right? You can maybe have fun with things like that. But the idea of just like learning to read and all the things that will eventually unlock for you that you can't even imagine at that point, as you're just like learning the alphabet, and sometimes the drudgery of, okay, now you've got to do your vocabulary words, and you're just like, oh, I hate this, I would rather go play, or I would rather go do something else, right? And even like as an adult, if you're learning some type of new drudgerous task, I'll coin that phrase. And it's just like, yeah, I'm doing this as a means to an end. But the fun, I think, of life is you really have no idea what the things that you're learning and that you're coming across will eventually unlock for you, and what kind of paths it will open up, and what kind of doors it will open up for you, where it seemed meaningless, or it seemed painful. And many times it was painful at the time. And sometimes you can see the end that's in mind, and other times you can't. And you can't really make heads or tails of it. But I think that's a part of what faith is. It's that belief that this is actually going to lead to something good for me. I just have the hope and the faith that will happen. And so that's in part what the point that he's making in the analogy that he's making here is reminding me of. Now, he's got a greater point that he's leading up to, but these are just some of the thoughts that bubble up for me.
Mm-hmm. In terms of alphabet and language learning, it's the development of a healthy expectation. I knew all my alphabet and my numbers up to 100 when I hit kindergarten, because I was the oldest daughter, and my grandmother babysat, and her and my mom would they would make up games for when we were riding in the car. And it was back before you had to have your kid in the backs, in the
in the seat. Yeah.
So I would stand on the front seat between them, and they would, if we approached a tunnel, train track. I only remember those two specifically, maybe stoplights, but they had a number of things where they had invented sound effects. And so they would start with one or two letters or one or two numbers, and they'd say, let's see how far we can get before we get to the tunnel, the train tracks. So we would all do it together. They'd go, okay, say it with me, A, B, C, and you go through the tunnel and you go, woo, woo. Yeah, the train tracks were bumpity bump. Those are on. I think those must have been the most exciting ones, because those are the two that stuck with me. And what they would do is they would start a little bit further back, a little bit further back, a little bit further back.
Yeah.
As I caught on. And so they developed that place inside me that was good at anticipating, the steps of getting there, the journey.
Yeah.
So what you were saying, I'm like, oh yeah, that is a powerful thing.
Yeah.
And it is related to faith in a number of ways, because like I've always loved, oh shoot, now I'm going to forget where it's from, Hebrews, I think. Faith is the, I get them reversed, substance of things, substance of things seen, the substance. Anyway, I'm going to fluster because I'm trying to remember the order, but you're talking about the things that are seen and the things that are hoped for. It's the evidence of things unseen, or the substance of things unseen and the evidence of things hoped for. And faith is an odd word, because it doesn't immediately grasp you as meaning that. We think of it as being the reverse. It's something you're taught to do or say or whatever, because all of this stuff is just invisible. But it's vital to life to actually have faith and to have that discipline, the persistence, getting there.
Well, the story that you were telling from your childhood, that's a beautiful story. And it made me think of this concept, like as you were getting the hang of things and you were looking forward, to the next, what the next thing was going to be.
Yeah.
It made me wonder about, the difference or maybe the similarities between anticipation and faith, right? you can anticipate some negative things, but I think more often the connotation of anticipation a lot of times is like an excitement. Like I'm really looking forward to. Sometimes it's the known, and sometimes it's the unknown, and sometimes it's a mix of the two, right? I've got plans.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I'm off work this week. So I was anticipating being off work this week just because I was going to be off work. But also, that was the known. But the unknown is, I've got a little bit of a schedule. We had this call on the calendar, but there are some unexpected things too, right? Like my morning in preparing for this, if this is not too graphic, my cat threw up. So I had to spend some time before I could hop on this call, cleaning up that vomit. I was not anticipating that. But it's the little surprises in life. Some of them you find pleasant in the moment. Others of them you don't find pleasant in the moment. But it's that anticipation of the things that are to come, and the hope that many of them are going to be pleasant and they're going to be a reward. And I think that's a little bit of what Lewis is talking about here as well. Is it's not a bad thing to want the rewards of something good for the toil or the difficulty that you're going through.
Absolutely. I think learning to have a positive concept of reward is, I think it's really important. And I'm not sure, I don't know, do people have that sense?
Like the negative version of it? Like a reward is a bad thing? Or do people have a
Where do
sense
they
that reward is
stand,
a
I
good thing?
guess? Like,
Sorry, say that again?
where do they stand? It's like the whole unselfishness love thing is, how do we weigh that concept? Sometimes, as a parent, you hear that people, there's those of the opinion that you shouldn't reward your children, or not too much. They should simply do it because they're told.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that misses an opportunity to help them develop all of those qualities, the anticipation, anticipation, expectation, having that sense of awareness of what's the things around you, and of the not just the steps to get there. We're a little bit too consumerism, and we teach people those. Every other ad on YouTube is teaching you how to do steps to some goal or another.
Yeah.
But I think if we don't, I think reward is such a positive concept that we've forgotten how to frame it, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's that it's like you talked about with the honey and the children learning the Torah, like building in that reward to associate it with good things, with things that are building you up, and that will lead to other rewards. It's like I can't think of the right phrasing for it, but it's like it builds upon itself, right? And then it builds up momentum to where it increases your capacity to appreciate the thing that you're doing, and it also at the same time is building on that to increase your anticipation of what is coming next, because it's gonna do the same thing over again, and it's gonna like scale up exponentially. That, I think that's the word that I was looking for.
So you mentioned this in relation to the Greek poetry. I think poetry is one place where having learned anticipation is self-feeding. It's like self-rewarding, because you go through a poem and you're waiting for certain parts, and I loved listening to you and Sherry talk through poems in a couple of the
Spirits in Bondage, episodes. Yep.
It's something about learning to see where the author's going, or learning, and God, when you look at scripture, God's the author. Sure, people wrote it down, and it's been copied a billion times in one form or another, but he's still the author. It all comes from him.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we learn to anticipate as we read, yeah.
Well, it's the joy of discovery as well, right? I'm just thinking back to reading
Yeah.
through some of those poems, and it's just like, well, I see this on the surface, but when I look a little bit more closely, or I listen to someone else who is seeing something that I'm not seeing, it's like, oh wow, that is there. I never saw that before. That's fascinating, and there's some fun, there's joy, there's reward in discovering the little secrets and the little Easter eggs, so to speak, that have been laid into whatever creation it is that you're looking at, whether it be a poem or even just like it's just so amazing sometimes. Like it's really flat here in Texas, which some people say, oh, I miss the mountains of this particular region, of the world, or something like that, or the hills. But one thing that flatlands really afford you is this magnificent canvas of the sky for sunrises and sunsets, and even like here in Texas, the gigantic mountainous majestic clouds that happen during like a summer day. And so just to have that revealed to you, like this moving painting
Right.
of the skies, is just so fantastic. To like, you might just be caught up in your day, and just to have that even like revealed to you. This isn't even the discovery point that I was getting at, but there are so many things like that to be seen in nature, and then also in the works of in the arts, for example. So yeah, it's pretty fun.
I bet. I love clouds, and um, I'm often, when I'm driving, trying to see the connection at the ones that are close to the horizon, or
Yeah.
the hill that you're passing, and then you go past like a whole range of trees, and or houses, and you're looking around trying to
Hmm.
catch it again. Yeah.
I just look up at the sky sometimes, and I see like these huge clouds that just like take up most of the sky. And just for a moment, if it's not grabbing my attention already, or even when it is, sometimes I just think, what would it be like if you encountered a building that was right here in front of you on the ground that was that size? Or think about it in a different way. What if it was like a living creature? Could you could you imagine the terror that you would experience if you came across a being that was that large? So these are just some of the things that run through my mind.
That's a good imagination. That's a good mind. Yeah.
All right, let me
Back to
get this back up on the screen. There you go.
okay. So
Where did we leave off?
uh, end of the top paragraph.
Okay.
So we're going to start with the Christian. The Christian in relation to heaven is in much the same position as this schoolboy. Those who have attained everlasting life in the vision of God doubtless know very well that it is no mere bribe, but the very consummation of their earthly discipleship. But we who have not yet attained it cannot know this in the same way, and cannot even begin to know it at all except by continuing to obey and finding the first reward of our obedience in our increasing power to desire the ultimate reward. Just in proportion as the desire grows, our fear lest it should be a mercenary desire will die away and finally be recognized as an absurdity. But probably this will not, for most of us, happen in a day. Poetry replaces grammar, gospel replaces law, longing transforms obedience, as gradually as the tide lifts a grounded ship. But there is one other important similarity between the schoolboy and ourselves. If he is an imaginative boy, he will quite probably be reveling in the English poets and romancers suitable to his age sometime before he begins to suspect that the Greek grammar is going to lead him to more and more enjoyments of the same sort. He may even be neglecting his Greek to read Shelley and Swinburne in secret. In other words, the desire which Greek is really going to gratify already exists in him, and is attached to objects which seem to him quite unconnected with Xenophon and the verbs in mu. Now, if we are made for heaven, the desire for our proper place will be already in us, but not yet attached to the true object, and will even appear as the rival of that object. And this, I think, is just what we will find. No doubt, there is one point in which my analogy of the schoolboy breaks down. The English poetry which he reads when he ought to be doing Greek exercises may be just as good as the Greek poetry to which the exercises are leading him. So that in fixing on Milton, instead of journeying on to Aeschylus,
I'll take whatever pronunciation you've got. I don't know how to say it.
I'd have to think about it. His desire is not embracing a false object, but in our case is very different. If a trans-temporal, trans-finite good is our real destiny, then any other good on which our desire fixes must be in some degree fallacious, must bear at best only a symbolic relation to what will truly satisfy. Those two words really gave me pause the first time I read through this. Reminds me a lot of the philosophical conversations that happen in the corner. And I haven't quite figured them out yet. I mean, I can read them, I can figure out what the different parts of them mean, but the context of using them is kind of still, trans-temporal, trans-finite.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like, aren't things either temporal or finite? But yeah, I'm kind of intrigued with, does he come back to them and what's he going to do with them?
Yeah, so the thing I get out of those words, and of course, I could be wrong, I probably am. So transtemporal, I think of right now, our existence as we know it revolves around this concept of time. Like, time is something that we're bound by, right? I had to be ready and have the cat, well, I'll just say vomit again, cleaned up in time to make it to this meeting, right? So I couldn't just sit there and, like I had to be finished at a certain time, so to speak. So we're time bound, and we can only move in one direction. It's not like I can go and revisit, other than in memory, experiences that I had, 15 years ago. I can't relive them in the same way that I'm living this moment. Or if I can, I'm not aware of doing that, or how to do it, or how to, engage in that. So if you're talking temporal, that's kind of what I'm describing is you've always got the present, and the present then moves into whatever the next thing is that's happening. There's no going backwards. It's a linear experience. So transtemporal is something that I can't quite wrap my head around, other than saying you're not bound in the same ways. You're moving beyond that constraint, either that real constraint, or that constraint that is in some way, what am I trying to say? That constraint that is in some way, it's just we are not aware enough yet of reality to see it as something other than a constraint. Like, there's this thing that Jordan Peterson has talked about before. It's one of the earliest videos that's on his channel on YouTube that you can go look up, where he talks about a part of the brain, I think it's called the thalamus, that acts as a gate on reality of all the things that your brain is capable of taking in through your five senses, and perhaps others that we haven't discovered yet. And there is just so much reality around us that we would be completely overwhelmed. We couldn't handle it all at once. We wouldn't be able to like make choices and work towards goals unless there was some kind of gate that limited, or some kind of filter that limited what things we take in and what things we don't, or what things we put our focus on and what things we don't. And so I wonder if this is a part of that gating process too, to where how we experience time is, of course, the gated version of experiencing reality. Whereas once we're capable, as soon as some of those guardrails are lifted, this trans-temporal existence that he's talking about here is something where it's just like, no. What you experience as the present, that thing that you went through, I think you said with your grandmother and with your mom and riding in the car, that's actually happening right now. It's not something that happened before and will never happen again. It's something that is happening. Everything is happening right now, everything all at once, to steal from a movie title. Everything, I can't remember what it is, but something like that. And so that's what I get out of trans-temporal. What's the other one?
Finite.
Transfinite. So transfinite, if you can kind of think of the concept of where it came from off of time, well, finite, the way that we view everything here is everything has a completion, right? This conversation that we're having is going to come to an end. Maybe these two concepts are kind of tying together, as I was just thinking about the trans-temporal, right? But if you're just thinking about how things end, that's the way that we view it right now. Is this conversation's going to end. You're going to go on to whatever the next thing on your schedule is. I'm going to go on to whatever the next thing on my schedule is. And this conversation came to an end. Now, it will live on, if all goes according to plan, in this recording where, we'll drop it on your channel. We'll eventually display it at some point on my channel. And, but transfinite is saying, well, no, or actually, let me get it to something that's much more severe or much more weighty. And that is our lives, right? Our physical, our natural lives. So our human lives begin at some point, and there's debate. Is it at conception? Is it at birth? Is it somewhere in between? Does our life begin even somewhere before that? Who knows? Were we living in our ancestors in some way before we had come together, as a zygote, and then ultimately as an embryo and an infant, and then what you see before you in its glory today, of the both of us. That it seems that there is also an end to our natural lives, right? Let's see. I know that I think I overheard that you've recently been to a funeral, or maybe more this year. And so we come face to face with this stark reality that we deal with finiteness, right? And so this concept of a transfinite is, no, death is not the end. There is more to our existence than this, and part of our reward is getting to experience something beyond that finiteness that seems to be not intricate, but inextricably tied up in what we know as human experience. It's just like there's no getting out of it, is what it feels like. Is death and taxes, those two things are guaranteed.
Always.
So that's what I get out of those two words. I can't remember if he elaborates on those any further in this sermon, or if he talks about it in other places, but those are some of the ideas that I get from those two words.
It's interesting that you mentioned in real life that, being weighty terms or weighty concepts. Excuse me. That words come up a lot the last few years in church context, where they were working through some difficult decisions, disagreements. And it kind of struck me that it's an odd word to use, but hearing you use it today in this context kind of has my attention. So I'm kind of, how do you perceive something that is or is not weighty, and in application to these concepts.
Mm-hmm. So there's one word that I think about that I've learned from, just various places as I'm focused on, spiritual or religious conversations and getting to meet people from different traditions, like Jacob Federecci. Yeah, look up Jacob Federecci if you've never heard of him before. Go find his channel. There's a lot of interesting content over there. He's one of our Jewish friends, and so this weightiness. There's a Hebrew word, and I'm probably going to mispronounce it, but it's kavod. And you asked me the question of, I guess, what do I associate with that word weighty, or how does it fit in with all of this? Like, one of the first things that comes to mind is something that's weighty is something that comes to the very top of mind or immediately to your attention. There's this concept that's been introduced before. I think it was in one of Jordan Peterson's books. I honestly can't remember. I just remember Paul Vanderklay mentioning it. And he uses this illustration of, if I come here and I walk into my office, there's all kinds of things in my office. And it has to do with that thalamus gating, what things get your attention and what things don't. So on a typical day, I walk in here, I see my desk, I see my headset, I see the books and various things that I have, the microphone, the phone stand, etc. But if I were to walk in here one day and there was a giant tiger sitting in my office, in addition to all of these things that are in here, there is only one thing that I would call weighty in that moment. And it would be the fact that there's this giant cat that could easily take my life just like that. And so the weightiness isn't necessarily even the cat, is it? It's really the finiteness that's built into me of needing to, oh my gosh, this life that I have, this physical life, this natural life, it is weighty because I feel an immediate instinct to protect it, to flee from danger that I think could quickly dispatch it away from me. And so that's what I think of initially in response to your question of, weighty. Things that are weighty are the things that tie back to what is most instantly important to us without us even having to think about it. It's like our natural reflex is to the things that are weighty or have that kavod.
Well, that's interesting because, context of depression, people often talk about being weighed down by depression or by other emotions. And I was like, oh, that then takes us back to the opening of the sermon where he's describing the differences that he experiences in the two terms, unselfishness versus love.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for the most part, I think I would find unselfishness would feel heavier to me because it comes, it's responsibility, where I think he's heading into likening love to joy and the higher level energy. So he's actually maybe pointing at the way that he's probably going to start pointing at faith or belief and energy as it, like faith, when you look at the concept that I was trying to get at with the scripture verse, faith is the, say, substance of things unseen, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. I'll get that one right eventually. That doesn't present it in a way that says to me, this is a big problem. This is something you're going to have to, I'm not pushing against something. When with your word anticipation, which I think is a form of positive energy, of moving into something rather than that instinct to pull away from it or to, stop and just kind of deal with how much you're holding it. So he's pointing at a lot of, we can say participatory, that's a big word but the actual, how do you engage with something? And I wouldn't have immediately thought of those words pulling that idea into my mind, but the way you're describing it in answer to my question, I do.
Mm-hmm.
Really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different places that you can go with this. You bringing up the weight being weighed down by something, right? There is a weightiness that can keep us from action. Sherry and I, in part 3 of the Spirits in Bondage series that we just, had the other day in the context of this. I've heard that you're supposed to keep recordings like this that you put out on the internet evergreen. So I don't know if I want to pull in, hey, here's when we did this or whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm getting distracted. Let's see. We had talked about the Irish Nocturne, that poem, and it talks a lot about the dankness and the bog and the mire. He doesn't use any of those words, but like the mist and how there's no refreshment and nothing. And that's also what I think about things being weighed down, like the descent of the fog, where it just kind of sits there and there's no life and there's no movement. And so that's one version of weightiness. Another word that comes to mind with the kavod concept, because it's the weight or the glory, like the weight of glory. We'll learn more about like the as we go on in this sermon. But another thing that I think is like solidity, the solidness. Like in one of Lewis's other works, The Great Divorce, there are these characters that live in heaven, and they come down to greet the newcomers who are like they're on the outskirts of heaven or the plains of heaven, who have just come up from the gray town or kind of the purgatory / hell place where they've taken a holiday to see if they like it up there in heaven. And the people who are best conditioned to live in that country are the most solid. They're the ones who can step on the grass and actually leave footprints, whereas the new people there who are just like coming out of the purgatory type area, it's like hard on their feet. Like it's so much more solid than they are. They're like these phantoms, right? They're like these slimy, grimy phantoms. And there's a weightiness to heaven as it's portrayed in The Great Divorce. And so that's another piece of this weightiness word, or this kavod word, that I'm thinking of.
I haven't read that I have not read that book yet, but it that whole concept puts me in mind of is it Tash, the god Tash in which one of
The Last Battle.
the last battle. And when you get to the scene where there's the shed is there, and what do you see? They're trying to explain to I think they were soldiers from Tashbaan. Correct me if I get the names wrong. It's been like 30 years since I read this. And they're describing all the disgusting and ugly and hard, horrible things they are experiencing there, when the children and the others are going, that's not what's there.
Yeah.
And so the children and the Narnians are capable of engaging in a solid manner with what is real, in a way that sadly, that always bothered me. I felt so sad. That always bothered me. That these soldiers who are being offered like a chance they can't take the chance. They're like the spirits you described.
Mm-hmm.
They're not solid.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Yeah, I think either Lewis says it or it might have been Dallas Willard. I can't remember who said it, but heaven, if you're thinking about it on these lines, is an acquired taste. And if you go back to like the example that he gave of learning Greek, of learning the alphabet, and then eventually getting on to things like poetry, or maybe even like engaging in a play, right? That's completely in Greek, and being able, or to converse, with other people who know it well, and being able to tell jokes and being able to have wordplay and fun like that. Like these are stages that you couldn't get to and couldn't enjoy unless you had, gone through that development and developed your own capacity to be able to carry those things out. And so if you can imagine, then one person who did go through all that, and then another person who, you don't even say they didn't necessarily go through it themselves, but just say that they're a child. Like, it's when a child gets put into an adult environment and there are all kinds of things going on. And what does a child typically say? I know what I said when I was a kid is, I am so bored. There's nothing to do here. But looking back on it now, I'm in my 50s at this point, and I can say, oh man, there are so many more things that I'm able to enjoy as an adult that would be completely boring to me as a child. And that makes you so much more even capable of entering into the child's world, of kind of helping, eventually get them up to the levels where they can understand these things. But the characters that you were just describing from the last battle, it's almost like they're in the child phase where I've got heaven all around me, and I am perceiving it as, I don't like this. This is unpleasant. This is gross. I can't stand it. Get me out of here. It's because they haven't reached that level of development. And I can see very easily how this can sound like, oh, so you're elitist and somebody has to oh, so you have to learn all these things and become an elitist to be able to get to be able to get to go to heaven. And the people who don't do that, I guess they just get cast off into hell. I can see it being read that way. And I think there's a whole lot more to it than that Lewis tries to get to. And so hopefully he can do a better job than I was just trying to do there as we continue through this sermon.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because Jesus says you have to come at it like a little child.
Right.
So I'm like, ooh, there's some things that my mind will be, like that's going to be mulling over there for a while, because like, so on the one hand, we're to approach our walk with God. We're to come to God as a little child. But if you stay stuck there, I'm often stuck with writing things. And so what I'll do is I will circle or loop around all the, I'll write another poem, I'll do another this, or whatever, because I'm afraid of that forward step of saying, oh, and now I'm going to submit it somewhere, or I'm going to share it with this person, or I'm going to, and I have a feeling that it's like the, trans-temporal. How horrible to not be trans-temporal. It's like me, with you're just dog paddling in one place, and there's no actual, it eventually becomes not only purposeless, but tiring, and it weighs you down in that negative sense when you have the opportunity to be somehow stepping forward into something and enjoying the energy of the activity. Instead, you're in a form of quasi inactivity. That's kind of, I got to think about that.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, the child part that comes to me is just like the openness, like the willingness to trust and to say, look, I don't like this, I'm not enjoying it, but I'm going to submit myself, to your leading and to your discipline, with the hope that it will turn into something better, and also that you'll give me little drops of honey on my tongue as a reward along the way.
I love honey. I gotta watch it now. I'm getting the lectures on not too many sweets.
Oh yeah, yep. No, I get it. All right, here we are.
Now, let's see. Did we get through that last sentence completely?
I think we got through that last paragraph. The best only a symbolical relation to what will truly satisfy.
Yeah. In speaking of this desire for our own far-off country, which we find in ourselves even now, I feel a certain shyness. I'm almost committing an indecency. I'm trying to rip open the inconsolable secret in each one of you, the secret which hurts so much that you take your revenge on it by calling it names like nostalgia romanticism, and adolescence. The secret also which pierces with such sweetness that when in very intimate conversation the mention of it becomes imminent, we grow awkward and affect to laugh at ourselves. The secret we cannot hide and cannot tell, though we desire to do both. Yeah. We cannot tell it because it is a desire for something that has never actually appeared in our experience. We cannot hide it because our experience is constantly suggesting it. And we betray ourselves like lovers at the mention of a name. Our commonest expedient is to call it beauty and behave as if that had settled the matter. Wordsworth's expedient was to identify it with certain moments in his own past. But all this is a cheat. I love that phrase. We don't say things like that anymore.
Yeah.
If Wordsworth had gone back to those moments in the past, he would not have found the thing itself, but only the reminder of it. What he remembered would turn out to be itself a remembering. I think you just said that in a way.
That's awesome.
The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them. It only came through them. And what came through them was, longing. These things. Do you want me to pause or go ahead?
Oh, no. If you've got something to say, pause. Yeah, if we want to talk about this a little bit.
Okay, go back up the page.
Yeah.
To look at the bulk of it.
There was some good stuff in there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's just start with that paragraph. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole embarrassment of we don't say things the way Lewis has framed them, but often I find that people will talk about they'll say something that's important, and then they'll say, "Oh, but that's stupid," you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we downplay it in different ways, but we're still doing that with so many things.
Just the way he does this right here of you take this wording, we take our revenge on it. It's just like, you're embarrassing me. I'm going to take revenge on you by just calling you, it's just nostalgia. It's just romanticism. That's your adolescence talking. Lewis had this thing about, he had a fear of being seen as a child where he was trying to be seen as a grown-up. And then he said, I eventually became mature enough to not have that fear anymore. And so now I don't mind reading like fairy tales and things like that and being seen as a child. That's kind of in the same vein of, nostalgia. That's a immature thing, romanticism, adolescence. And so we take revenge on it by using those words that are kind of like insulting it or downplaying. And it's just like, no. It is the core of your existence, this thing that you're longing for. And but you can't put a name to it. You can't put it in words. And that's part of it as well. Your deep, deep longing to want to be able to do those things. Because in some way, somehow expressing it would somehow get you closer to reaching it. And even that, I think he's saying here subtextually, is even that's not going to do it.
Yeah. I think it's funny. I'm remembering my cousin saying to me, I don't know, we were in our 20s or 30s, and she said something about, I'm going to go and see such and such a movie, animation, I don't remember what it was. And I said, that's nice. Are you going on your own? Who are you going with? And she went, oh no, I'm borrowing a child, so I won't. Yeah.
That's great. Actually, I had that. So I'll date this a little bit. My wife and I last night went to see Wicked Wicked Part 1, which there are 2 movies, in case you didn't know. I had forgotten going in that they split it into 2 movies. But we were watching the trailers before the movie, and there was some kids movie, that popped up. And my kids are adults now, and I told her, oh man, I need to get some grandkids so I can have an excuse to start watching these kind of movies again.
Yeah. Or borrow one.
Yeah, or borrow one. Yes.
Some poor stressed parent that would love to have their 10-year-old or their 5-year-old out for an hour or 2.
Right. Yeah, there are plenty of people out there like that. We should help them out more often for our own selfish reasons to go watch these
That's
movies
right.
that we want to watch. That we're
See,
embarrassed.
unselfishness is overrated. It's the wrong word.
Right. I'm taking up my cross by babysitting your child for 3 hours.
Yep. Popcorn in hand.
Right. There was another part in here that really jumped out at me, because he gets into this concept a little bit also in his book, The Weight of Glory. Like he has a chapter, or sorry, not The Weight of Glory. His book, The Problem of Pain. He has a chapter in that book on heaven. He has one on heaven. He has one on hell. Hell is the first one, like in order of the chapters, and then hell or heaven comes right after hell. But he talks about this thing, like this longing. The thing is the longing. It's not the memory. It's not the song. It's not the piece of art that you're looking at. You're seeing through those things, as icons, if you will, towards the thing itself. And the thing itself is that longing. And it's that longing for what even the Christian virtue, love, is pushing you towards, right? And it's that longing is that following of Christ. It's that leading on into that Christ, that relationship with Christ. But even if somebody is not a Christian, certainly I think they could at least assent to, or agree, or admit, that's the word I'm looking for too, this common experience of, yeah, I do have longings and I have desires in my life, and some of them seem to have fulfilled me at the time, but there are I continue to have longings for something that I can't necessarily name. Now, maybe people would disagree with that, but I feel like this is a pretty common experience from my life.
Yeah. Interesting to see. I find that people around are talking. There's more conversation about religion in general. And I work with people we have a map of the world up in one of the staff rooms, and it's got to be like 100 pins in it from various places where people are originally from, if not you, then, like I put a pin in Scotland because my dad's from there. I've never lived in Scotland, and I'm born in Canada, but at the same time, I put a pin there because I'm like, there wasn't a pin there yet, and I find it really interesting because some of the people I work with will talk about, but what are the traditions around this or that? And, it's funny, like growing up in Canada, to be able to talk about church, religion, or whatever was really awkward, kind of, I think we went through that whole God is dead phase, and you don't talk about it, but other people seem, especially some of the younger, I say girls, but they're probably in their 20s. They might be 30. Even some of the upper teens, they will talk about it. They'll talk about stuff. It's just a lot more okay to talk about whatever you want to talk about, and yeah. So to kind of say that, like, I know when I think about the Gospels, my grandmother used to get she got Reader's Digest Bible storybooks for us. My favorites were get my hand wrapped if I go ahead and say this, in the Jewish scriptures, we'll say. So the story of David
in the old Jewish scriptures.
I did that, yeah. Yeah, it's hard to scrub your
Your
childhood
programming.
programming there. but my favorites were David and Esther. Those were of all the stories. And when we got to take, my sister took a book or two, and I took a book or two from the series. Hers were New Testament stories, and but like even though mine were, like my stories were not from the Gospels. They weren't from Acts. They weren't from any of the Christian books.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, when I think about reading the Gospels, they remind me of that same quality. Reading the stories of David and Esther, in that you're right there in the middle of the story.
Mm.
I can place myself in the story. I can imagine,
Being there.
yeah,
Yeah.
very easily. They're framed that way. They're meant to be stepped into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and yeah, that just to me is so. It's tangible. You said solid before. It's very tangible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. There's let's see. There was one other thing that he said in here. It's that maybe it was just the cheat part, which you've already commented on. It's just a fun little turn of
Just laugh
phrase.
at.
We cannot tell it because it is a desire for something that has never actually appeared in our experience. Yeah. We can't hide it because our experience is constantly suggesting it, and we betray ourselves. Yeah. It took me a while to figure out what this means, this sentence, but I think I figured it out. We cannot hide it because our experience is constantly suggesting it. This part right here. And we betray ourselves like lovers at the mention of a name. So it took me a while to kind of figure out maybe what he's talking about there. But what I think is, let's say that you have a secret lover, and somebody who doesn't know that you have this person as your secret lover mentions their name. Like your whole countenance, I'm sure, changes, and the way that you look and you appear. So you can betray your secret in that way whenever somebody mentions that person's name. That's what I presume he means here. So I don't know if you're getting another meaning out of that or not.
Similar. Like if you're young, if you're in your teens, early 20s, and you find yourself and you're looking for that natural instinct to want a partner in life, to want to, and there's some people that and you're just friends.
Mm.
You might smile at engaging with that person.
Yeah.
But if you meet somebody that kind of the doors just open, there's that two-way conversation. I think we're designed in some ways to that place of anticipation of you'll know it when you see it kind of concept of love or relationship. I think what he's saying is this is a very relational thing, so that it's really hard to stuff it down. If you have a moment, like even going for a walk, if I have a moment where something reminds me of something, a time, an event, a place that was just really, I cherished it for some reason. That same kind of smile will sometimes creep into my face and my expression. I used to hate it when my friends in my teens would say, "You have one of those faces. You couldn't lie if they paid you $1 million." And I think he's kind of getting at that place as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
I love it. Our commonest expedient is to call it beauty and behave as if that settles the matter.
Right. There, I've done away with it. I can put that away.
Boy. Yeah.
But all this is a cheat. If Wordsworth had gone back to those moments in the past, he would not have found the thing itself, but only the reminder of it. What he remembered would turn out to be itself a remembering. These are longing. Yeah. The thing is longing. Okay. You want to pick up?
Sure. These things, The beauty, the memory of our own past are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. Do you think I'm trying to weave a spell? I know, it's like, perhaps I am. But remember your fairy tales.
I mean, perhaps he is. I get goosebumps sometimes when I read stuff that Lewis writes, and it's when he gets on this topic, and I'm getting them right now. Sorry.
Don't apologize. I'm like, he's doing a great job here. Yeah. So I love that like that sentence with, they're only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune. Like he's prompting the activity of the sense itself in response to the words on the page. Yeah, he's good.
This Lewis guy, he's pretty good.
I think I heard that somewhere. So, do you think I'm trying to weave a spell? Perhaps I am, but remember your fairy tales. Spells are used for breaking enchantments as well as for inducing them. And you and I have need of the strongest spell that can be found to wake us from the evil enchantment of worldliness, which has been laid upon us for nearly 100 years. I was trying to think why he specified 100 years.
Yeah, because this is 1941.
Yeah, like is it in reference to his actual time frame, or was that because he's alluding to Sleeping Beauty, who was to sleep for the 100 years, or like, I'm like, what is he doing there?
Oh, interesting.
I'm not sure which, because it could be either or both.
Yeah. Yeah, is it 100-year spell that we've been laid under, and it's just more of like a figurative way of painting the picture, or is he specifically locating this in somewhere within the last 100 years between 1841 and 1941?
Or is he even sneaking it in to make us reflect on it, because he's pointing to it and weaving his spell to say, here, look at this. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Almost our whole education has been directed to silencing this shy, persistent inner voice. Almost all our modern philosophies have been devised to convince us that the good of man is to be found on this earth. And yet it is a remarkable thing that such philosophies of progress or creative education themselves bear reluctant witness to the truth that our our real goal is elsewhere. When they want to convince you that earth is your home, notice how they set about it. They begin by trying to persuade you that earth can be made into heaven, thus giving a sop to your sense of exile in earth as it is. Next, they tell you that this fortunate event is still a good way off in the future, thus giving a sop to your knowledge that the fatherland is not here and now. Finally, lest your longing for the trans-temporal should awake and spoil the whole affair, they use any rhetoric that comes to hand to keep out of your mind the recollection that even if all of the happiness they promised could come to man on earth, yet still each generation would lose it by death, including the last generation of all. And the whole story would be nothing, not even a story, forever and ever. Hence all the nonsense that Mr. Shaw puts into the final speech of Lilith and Bergson's remark, that the élan vital is capable of surmounting all obstacles, perhaps even death. as if we could believe that any social or biological development on this planet will delay the senility of the sun or reverse the second law of thermodynamics.
I'm going to
Excuse me.
pause there for a second. There's
Excuse me.
another essay that Lewis wrote called Is Theology Poetry? I don't know if you've ever heard of that one or read it before.
I hadn't, but in looking up things about this one, I saw that and it's grabbed my attention.
So there was one sentence in here where he reminded me of what he says in that essay. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, this one. Finally, lest your longing for the transtemporal should awake and spoil the whole affair, they use any rhetoric that comes to hand to keep out of your mind the recollection that even if all the happiness they promise could come to man on earth, yet still each generation would lose it by death, including the last generation of all, and the whole story would be nothing, not even a story, forever and ever. So Is Theology Poetry there is a fantastic thing that he does in that essay where he is essentially laying out why atheism was so attractive to him. And there was like a certain romance and a certain grandeur in the story of, humanity starting out as this, little biological figure, that transformed through evolution and then became this being, that could go about and manipulate things with its hands, and then eventually developed this type of intelligence that's become the intelligence that we experience today as humanity, and that we continue to ascend to greater and greater heights. And so we rose up out of the muck and out of the mire, and we did these grandiose and wonderful things. And then the perfect way that this all ends is, it all burns out, and it burns out bright, and then the heat death of the sun and the entire universe, and then it all goes to nothing. And there's just like a beautiful poetry to that, that rising and then that falling. And he said it's an amazing story. It's a fantastic story. And he takes it someplace else, in his essay, but that sentence right there just harkened back in my mind to his Theology Poetry treatment of the kind of that whole idea that's presented.
Does he? Excuse me. I do have here a book, his one book of poems, and I'm assuming it's. I was trying to look it up. I've got this one.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was looking to see if it contained any of the poems that you were reading with Sherry from the book that I had not heard of. And remind me, did he write that first book under Hamilton?
Yeah, he went by the name Clive Hamilton because the C in C.S. Lewis stands for Clive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've always enjoyed saying his name, Clive Staples Lewis.
Right? And he
British
hated
he
hated his name so much so that he just went by Jack his entire life.
Which is awesome. But so in his poems, I'm guessing if I get into this one, then I guess I should find like The Hidden Country, Backward Glance, Larger World, Further Up and Further In. He's got all of those themes I see running through Narnia as the kids face each in turn their grief of not being able to access Narnia.
Yeah.
They're too old, and the fear of forgetting it. But am I likely to find in here then theological poems?
I think so. I think it depends on when the poem was written.
Well, he's got, in The Larger World, he's got Virtue's Independence, Deadly Sins, There must be a few things in here, but if not, does he have, like, where would one find his, like, poems specifically on a theological frame or on a theological topic?
I think there are a couple of different. There's at least two books that have been compiled of poems that he's written, in addition to the one that Sherry and I have been working through. So, Spirits in Bondage was his first published work of any sort, and it was a book of poems that he wrote as essentially as an atheist and somebody who was experiencing, the terrors of World War One. But as far as like poems, once I think he had moved into his, Christian phase and that are more theologically minded, I'm not very familiar with his poems, and I would like to be, better acquainted with them. I think you just have to go out there and look for books that are compilations of Lewis poems. Like there's one that I bought that's called Narrative Poems, and it's got his second ever published work on it, which I'll get to, relatively soon. Like sometime in the new year, I'm sure I'll get around to it. It's called Dymer, Dymer. And it's, again, he wrote it here at this stage in his life where I'm at right now. I mean, right now, technically, when I'm playing this video on my channel, I'll be all the way up to 1941. But back in 1920, 21-ish, 22, he published this narrative poem. But I'm not answering your question. I think there are just compilations out there, and you just have to go look for, like books of C.S. Lewis poems, and you'll eventually be able to find the various ones that were written once he converted, actually was a confessed convert to Christianity.
I can foresee a number of conversations with my local independent bookstore. Actually, I have several local independent bookstores. I'm very fortunate. I live in an area that's just is rife a word? Like when there's like, I have a plethora of creative venues, people. The air is saturated with it. It's just, I really feel very fortunate. And poetry is one of the things that's happening. And so I have been buying books of poetry by some of the local authors as I'm trying to figure out how do I want to frame a chapbook of my own. So thinking about listening to your conversation with Sherry, thinking about books I haven't heard from Lewis and concepts that I hadn't really applied to him, in terms of things that my perception of his interests. I can see really digging deeper into the poetry side of it for sure.
Just for those who don't know, because I had to look this up when you told me about it, but can you describe what a chapbook is?
Oh, sure. So you'll often find, poetry, besides showing up in your Hallmark cards, poetry, you can have like a broadsheet, which is a single page. I'm still learning what that is, but presentation of some one or more poems. Then the next size up would be a chapbook, which can have generally somewhere between maybe 15 and 30 poems in it.
Okay.
And then after that, you could create or participate in an anthology of poetry that has, like even this one, I was shocked how many, like that's okay. That's not a huge book. But he must have 100 poems in here. I mean, there's every page. Okay, how many pages? Take off 5 for intro. Okay, and X. So aside from the appendix and the introduction, some pages have several, and there's 137 pages in this book. So even if you knock 30 pages off, or 7 pages off out of the 130, it's 130 pages of poems.
Yeah.
There's a lot of poems in here.
Yeah.
That would be, maybe like, so that would probably count as a small, I don't know if that would count as a small anthology, but it's definitely bigger than chapbook. Some of the chapbooks I have are like maybe a quarter to a half an inch thick at most. And they'll often run on a theme, not a topic or a theme or just a mood. I've been given some homework as to, do I want to just choose, break it down by, I'll do my first, choose my favorite poems from my first 10 years of writing poems, or, you can choose to lay it out how you want. But generally it's just a comfortable, short read, something you can take time and reflect on. You're not going to be digging into it necessarily for months on end.
Yeah, you won't get an overload of information to try to process.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is a new. I'm developing a new language, the language of poetry editing, and how to talk about all the things editors want to tell you about.
Okay.
Yeah, anticipating it.
All right.
We're at the
we're at the next paragraph. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do what we will, then we remain conscious of a desire which no natural happiness will satisfy. But is there any reason to suppose that reality offers any satisfaction to it? Nor does the being hungry prove that we have bread. But I think it may be urged that this misses the point. A man's physical hunger does not prove that man will get any bread. He may die of starvation on a raft in the Atlantic. But surely a man's hunger does prove that he comes of a race which repairs its body by eating and inhabits a world where eatable substances exist. I actually paused at this one because I was listening to some of the Matthew Peugeot group reading through Language of Creation.
Yeah.
And the one that's in Bridges of Meaning, the symbolism. I forget what their title is. They're going through that book now, and they were just at the spot where food, eating, the imagery and symbolism of eating came up. So I was like, oh, good. It comes up here too. I want to kind of see where it goes. In the same way, though, I do not believe, I wish I did, that my desire for paradise proves that I shall enjoy it. I think it a pretty good indication that such a thing exists, and that some men will. A man may love a woman and not win her, but it would be very odd if the phenomenon called falling in love occurred in a sexless world. Pause or go on?
Do you have a thought?
Just sign language.
Oh,
all
okay.
all the words for like thirst, hunger, they're the same words as desire.
Okay.
There's like, you see it in poetry, and you see it occasionally in sermons, but yeah, there's definitely overlap. So yeah, I wonder if in general, when he was presenting the sermon, if people make that immediate association back in 1940 or not. But yeah, probably if they've read any Greek poetry.
Yeah, I would think so.
Here then, or did you have a thought?
No, I'm good. Go ahead.
Here then is the desire, still wandering and uncertain of its object, still largely unable to see that object in the direction where it really lies. Our sacred books give us some account of the object. It is, of course, a symbolic account. Heaven is, by definition, outside our experience. But all intelligible descriptions must be of things within our experience. The scriptural picture of heaven is therefore just as symbolic as the picture which our desire unaided invents for itself. Heaven is not really full of jewelry any more than it is really the beauty of nature or a fine piece of music. The difference is that the scriptural imagery has authority, comes to us from writers who were closer to God than we, and it has stood the test of Christian experience down the centuries. The natural appeal of this authoritative imagery is to me at first very small. At first sight, it chills rather than awakes my desire. And that is just what I ought to expect. If Christianity could tell me no more of the far-off land than my own temperament led me to surmise already, then Christianity would be no higher than myself. 1 second. If it has more to give me, I must expect it to be less immediately attractive than my own stuff. Sophocles at first seems dull and cold to the boy who has only reached Shelley. I know, I was like, I don't think I ever reached Shelley. Very different schooling. If our religion is something objective, then we must never avert our eyes from those elements in it which seem puzzling or repellent. For it will be precisely the puzzling or the repellent which conceals what we do not yet know and need to know.
Oh, let's stop right there. So this reminds me of, and I think he's talked about this before in other places that I've read, so it's no surprise that it reminds me. Like, it reminds me of the parts in the old Hebrew scriptures where it talks about like ordering the deaths of children, like the slaughtering of, people groups and things like that, where it seems, or maybe it doesn't just seem, maybe it's very explicit that God is ordering, that the Israelites, the Hebrews carry out, essentially the execution, the genocide, to use a term that's used quite a bit, of these certain people. I like what Lewis says right here. Some things we will find puzzling, maybe at best, and repellent at worst. It will be precisely the puzzling or the repellent which conceals something that we don't yet know, or something that we need to know. Now I can sense a certain reaction to that of saying, well, what are you saying it is that we need to know, that God actually does call for us to carry out these type things, and he might, or she, or however you want to express God, call you to carry out these things? Well, that is just, that's, I can't accept a God like that. But just, so I get that. But this concept of perhaps the things that I'm most repelled by, I should think more about them as things that perhaps shouldn't drive me away, but rather to dig deeper. Is there something more to this? What am I missing? It certainly can't mean this thing that's repelling me. So that's an extreme example, and perhaps the thing that's repelling you is repelling you for a good reason, but there's something else that I would argue that needs to be followed up on there. But there are less extreme examples of just like, well, I don't like this particular part of scripture, or I don't like the sense that it gives to empower people to say, certain things about certain people or certain lifestyles or things like that. I don't like this part of scripture, so I stay away from that. Some people have found very helpful things in there when they've dug like deeper into them to, some people will use it to like further bolster the position that they hold on a particular topic, or they might use it to dig deeper into it and say, oh my gosh, I was seeing this in a completely different light. I think the thing that was repelling me at first is actually making more sense. And so people can go like in different directions, but I think Lewis is allowing for that, if I can speak for him here in this statement of just saying, hey, it's actually there for that purpose, is to drive you further and further into exploration or into finding out the thing that you need to know that you don't yet know.
I actually loved this sentence for the very reason of the things that it says. Because it hard hits at truth. So like I love puzzles. My oldest son, deaf, autism, cranial synostosis, a whole bunch of surgeries, behavior issues, ton of stuff. Puzzling and repellent in a number of ways.
Yeah.
You can't close your eyes. If we avoid the things that puzzle and repel us about an idea, about other people, about situations, stuff that comes up in life, it's really unhealthy. It's like the days when I don't wash the dishes in my sink. And once I haven't washed them, for one day, I'm afraid to go back the second day because I find it repellent that I could leave them all sit there. And eventually I'll have a whole week full of, dishes with all their, and if I've tried to, like spray them down or something, well, then you get stagnant water because I've ignored it. I mean, facing puzzling and repellent things is so vital to our health. It's not funny. Like I'm working through some of that concept now is why do I pull away from some things? I have PTSD from luckily not as ongoing distressing as it was a while ago, but every once in a while something will surprise me because I'll be like, where did that come from? You're like, what was that? Sort of the triggering of an emotion or a memory or something that, it was shocking at the time, but the very fact that it could come up again in a completely unrelated situation and has no actual known purpose to be there, that itself is a shock. And then I'm trying to disengage from it. And yeah. So I think he's saying something that we don't necessarily think of because our world has gotten so into the habit of putting things in boxes and keeping the boxes that we really like far away from the boxes that we really don't like.
Right.
But really, what's the point to that? It's like the worst. It's like the reverse of the way he's trying to weave magic. It's like we think that we can create this kind of magic that's going to take all of the troubles away, all of the whatever away, and then this world is going to be that beautiful, glorious place that if we just fix it in the right way, we can enjoy without any bad stuff forever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that hasn't happened yet, ever.
Right.
Not ever. And we're still all those people trying to throw things into boxes and shove them out of sight, or occasionally bring them out to point at and, say, this is why this and this and this, and, or say why I'm right about whatever, or why you're wrong about whatever, or why this or why that. I had my sister and I didn't get to be friends growing up. There were family reasons, dynamics, unhealthy stuff. I'm the oldest child in a family with. I told a counselor once to ask me to sum up what she most needed to know about why I was there to see her in terms of family. And I said to her, I am a single parent in a 2-parent household, raising 2 only children. I am the oldest person in my entire family. Now that doesn't count cousins, but my parents were youngest. My mom pushed me into marrying a youngest. I fought with my now middle sister for a decade and a bit until we adopted my other younger sister. And so I've had two youngest sisters. And as you know, I said to her, my oldest has no ability to be an oldest. And my youngest doesn't feel like a youngest because he's too busy picking up the slack. He said to me, most of the time I just feel like a middle child and can't figure out why. A lot of us try to avoid thinking about these places. I just got really good at dissociating. As my trauma counselor said to me, Sandy, you don't breathe in enough air to resuscitate an ant, and you're far too good at dissociating. Yeah.
That's a good line.
Yeah, the first half's going to be one of the chapters in the memoir I'm writing. So
Nice.
I'm just like, ugh. But I have found that it's a lot more comfortable to face the puzzles and face the, just to face it.
Mm-hmm.
Give myself permission to look at it.
Yeah.
Laugh at myself when appropriate. And, there's nothing wrong with cringing when it's warranted. And there's been times it's been warranted.
Yeah.
But avoiding it, nobody gains a better life by learning to dissociate too well from the stuff they want to avoid. They just don't.
Yeah.
So
That's good.
So I loved that sentence. The promises of Scripture may very roughly be reduced to 5 heads. It's promised, firstly, that we shall be with Christ. Secondly, that we shall be like him. Thirdly, with an enormous wealth of imagery, that we shall have glory. Fourthly, that we shall, in some sense, be fed or feasted or entertained. And finally, that we shall have some sort of official position in the universe, ruling cities, judging angels, being pillars of God's temple. The first question I ask about these promises is, why any of them except the first? Can anything be added to the conception of being with Christ? For it must be true, as an old writer says, that he who has God and everything else has no more than he who has God only. I think the answer turns again on the nature of symbols. For though it may escape our notice at first glance, yet it is true that any conception of being with Christ, which most of us can now form, will not be very much less symbolical than the other promises. For it will smuggle in ideas of proximity in space and loving conversation as we now understand conversation. And it will probably concentrate on the humanity of Christ to the exclusion of his deity. I'm going to sip and comment on the fact that conversations as we now understand conversation grabbed my attention. I went recently to a presentation by, it's one of the writing awards here in Canada. One of those literary ones where you go and you do give presentations. And that was, I picked the book up, which is here somewhere. It's a book about having conversations and how we do it. And the fact that I get to participate in a lot of conversation around the corner means I wanted to hear what somebody not in the corner had to say about it. So I'll probably come back to that at some point.
Okay.
Excuse me. And in fact, never did take the sip, did I? In fact, we find that those Christians who attend solely to this first promise always do fill it up with very earthly imagery indeed. In fact, with hymeneal or erotic imagery. I am not for a moment condemning such imagery. I hardly wish I could enter into it more deeply than I do, and pray that I yet shall. But my point is that this is only a symbol, like the reality in some respects, but unlike it in others, and therefore needs correction from the different symbols in the other promises. The variation of the promises does not mean that anything other than God will be our ultimate bliss. But because God is more than a person, and lest we should imagine the joy of his presence too exclusively in terms of our present poor experience of personal love, with all its narrowness and strain and monotony, a dozen changing images, correcting and relieving each other, are supplied. I found this an interesting paragraph. I found myself wondering first off, how old is he in 1940? And so he must be around 40 if you said you're in 1920s in the letters,
Yeah,
and he's around 20.
he was born in November 29th, actually, of 1898. So he's like 41 or 40, he's like 42 years old.
Yeah, so has he met Joy yet? Or
I don't think so. I don't think at this stage.
no, I did. My guess was he might have been in his 50s or when he met her, or
I think that's right.
yeah, so which made reading this interesting, because he's speaking from a place where it goes back to that thing that you long for, the country you long for that you haven't been to yet.
Mm-hmm.
you know um and yet he's still saying, like, he's still likening the experience of personal love as something that could have a narrowness to it, a monotony and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of like, interesting.
Yeah, he could add some commentary to this, or he could inform himself on this by reading from his journal that later turned into A Grief Observed, I'm sure, to help him see all the different aspects of, that love of a person, and how in one way you're thinking of it of, oh, that's just so limited, but how expansive it actually really is, once you go through that experience, and even the experience of losing them to death. Another thing I find interesting in this paragraph right here, what I'm getting from it is perhaps we do have a narrow conception of what it means to be with another person, and to be with Christ. We are kind of thinking about that, he said it earlier, exclusively as Christ in his human form. But I'm also reading that these other four ways of what our quote eternal reward will be like has all of these other aspects to it. And I think what he's saying in this paragraph is, once you get to know God on full or more full levels of God, you will see that all of these other examples are still an aspect of being with Christ.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, my partner Jack died 3 years ago. I was only with him for about 5 years, but it really struck me when I look at the long, hard work of trying to make a good marriage with my first husband, and the difference from that place of effort and intentionality, um, doing the same thing over again, like with Jack starting from that beginning place, and um, our intentions there seem to be almost more intentional, you know. Um, we worked very hard at our relationship. At the same time, we were such good friends, and and a lot of laughter, an awful lot of laughter. Um, Sometimes even when we were angry, just because. So I look at this and I think, yeah, I, I watched the movie on Lewis and Joy Davidson recently, and I thought, oh, that's so heartbreaking. Because it was the one that has Anthony, yeah, Anthony Hopkins. Oh, what's
Mm-hmm.
his?
The
Yeah, it was that one,
Shadowlands.
Shadowlands. Oh my goodness, I thought he did such a good job of that, of
Mm-hmm.
portraying Lewis there, and what got me, probably in part because it reminded me of Jack and some of the issues he had lived through as a child and young man, in ways that Lewis had, and how the holding back, the holding back, the holding back, and finding the difficulty in actually expressing love verbally, where you actually say the thing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, and how much in the movie Joy needed him to, there were certain things that she's like, why don't you,
Right.
whatever,
We, you know you love me. Why are you acting like you don't? Yeah.
Yeah, and being able to see a lot of the why and
Mm-hmm.
how, and yeah, and then I'm reading this paragraph, this little paragraph, um, where I'm like, he's gonna come to that point that is the Shadowlands, and yeah, and the revelation of himself, his own emotions, the journey, the whole thing, and that sense of, you want to scream it every single day, you know. Um, and that sentence, the variation of promises does not mean that anything other than God will be our ultimate bliss. That portion of that sentence, I'm like, yeah, I hear that resonate through my conversations with God when I'm praying specifically, or even just chattering to him about life and choices, and about my partner's name was Jack too.
Mm.
um, yeah, that place where I'm like, I've gone my whole life through the really, really tough spots telling friends at church, no matter what else happens, I cannot afford to lose God, no matter what else happens.
Mm.
And then you run into some of the hard things that do happen and how devastating they can be. And still, I'll catch myself and I'll say it. You have to say it. No matter what else happens, I cannot afford to lose God. Um, and that goes back to that puzzling and repulsive things that we look at, that place of, we want perfection on earth. We want the fixer. We want the fixer upper.
Mm-hmm.
We think we do, but we don't really. Um, no, we want the real thing, you know. Um, and I don't know where I'd be if I didn't have God at my side through my whole life,
Mm.
because that's the real thing.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm like, wow, he said that all in the thing that looks about this big, even on the screen.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a little short on time right now, and I think that's actually a good place to to put a pin in this, but we can certainly come back to this if you're willing, and we can find the time again.
Absolutely. Doesn't have to be, today or tomorrow kind of thing. It's like just, yeah.
We can do it whenever. That's the great thing about this, is we actually can pause the time constraints with working our way through written text, right? We can just come back to it whenever we want.
Yeah, and it's I think that's a really good spot to stop.
Okay. Well, Sandy, thank you so much for volunteering to come on as a special co-host for this section of my reading project. And yeah, you're invited back anytime. And of course, if you're ever available to hop in on a live stream whenever I'm looking through, his letters on the timeline, feel free to jump in there. You're always welcome.
Awesome. I really appreciate your time today. And also I don't know, it was just one moment or so that you were there in one of the voice chats or wherever we were. Was it voice or text? I don't even remember anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But saying, oh yeah, if you like Lewis, come on and, come and talk about him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Extending the invitation. Yeah, those open door moments are really key.
Sure. And if anybody watching this, if you have something in Lewis that you like or something that resonates with you, reach out to me. You can email me. The email should be in the channel description of my channel, the Shoulder Surf channel. But yeah, we can come on, we can read through and talk about whatever suits your fancy with Lewis. So feel free. I guess I'll stop right here, Sandy. I'll stop the recording here in just a second, but I guess I'll give my normal outro. So until next time, when I continue my read on C.S. Lewis, everybody out there, take care of yourself.